Happy Monday morning and welcome back to Drinking by Myself. My name is Emma and today I'm going to tell you about all of the 5-star books I've read so far in 2020. We're basically halfway through the year, a little bit more than halfway through the year, and so far I have read 88 books, which is wild for me. I've never read that many books halfway through a year. It's because I keep doing these bloody 24-hour readathons and reading like whole series. But anyway, I've read 88 books, and of those 88, 8 of them have been 5-star reads. So we're talking like roughly 10%. That's maths, right? That's not loads of 5 stars, but it's also about right for me. I'm pretty stingy with my 5 stars, but at the same time, I've talked before about how ratings are like so arbitrary for me because it's such a kind of random like spur of the moment mood thing. I did a whole video quite recently that we'll link to on books that I didn't give 5 stars to but should have, because looking back on them I now think about them all the time and they definitely should have been 5-star reads for me. So basically, what does a 5-star mean? I don't know. What's the point of this video? Why are we here? Why were we born and put on this earth? But these are books that I did give 5 stars to so far this year, and looking at this list I still agree. I still love all of these books 5-star amounts. Okay, the first 5-star read I read in 2020, I actually read in January. January was a stellar month for me for reading, and it was Severance by Ling Ma, which was so surprising because Severance is a zombie novel. Zombie novel and Emma are not words that are usually heard in the same sentence, especially not when that sentence also contains the words 5-star read. 2020, the year everything changed, and this was just the precursor to everything else. I'm sorry, maybe it was my fault. I read this book, liked it, and I turned the world on its axis. Severance is also, in hindsight, a very relevant novel, though I did not know that at the time. So, what happens in this book? It's set in New York. Our main character is called Candace. She's like a 20-something, millennial. She doesn't like her job. Her relationship is not going great. I think they break up right at the start, or they're not in a good place. So she's living those relatable millennial city life problems. And then a global pandemic hits. Sound familiar? This hadn't happened when I read this book, or at least it had started, but I didn't know what was going to happen. What's also weird is that she works in publishing, she works in production, and the first way that this starts to affect her is that when she's speaking to the factories in China, the printers in China rather, who print she works in producing Bibles, and she's totally not interested in it. And the printer that print the Bibles for her shut down because the pandemic has hit them first. So all very strange mirrors going on here. But what's different here, we hope not what's going to happen with COVID-19, is that this pandemic turns people into zombies. But the book is basically split between during this pandemic and after, the kind of aftermath of it. So in the aftermath, she has left the city and she joins up with this group of survivors, and they go around trying to find food, and sometimes they do come across some of the zombies, and that's quite scary. But it's not like what I would think from a zombie novel. The zombies themselves are written in a way that's very creepy but very different from anything that I have heard of before. I haven't really read or watched or anything, haven't consumed much zombie media, so my understanding of them is limited. But they're called fevered. They're never called zombies in the book. The people who are affected are called fevered, and it's a very metaphorical, allegorical form of being a zombie. So anyway, in the aftermath, she's with this group of survivors trying to make their way to a shopping mall, key trope in any zombie book, where they will find safety and food and resources. And then at the same time, we're flashing back to her life as this pandemic is hitting and slowly shutting down the entire city, and how long she stays there, going to her job every day, trying not to let it affect her and let it not feel real. And slowly the city, New York, becomes this ghost town because everyone has left, everyone has fled, and she just keeps going to work every day. So it's very much using zombies as this metaphor of the monotony of our daily life. There are phrases that are repeated, almost every chapter starts with, I got up, I went to work in the morning. So it is it is clear what Ling Ma is doing with this, but it didn't feel to me heavy-handed at all. It felt so on the nose and so readable, and half of it just felt like a really relatable millennial story. And then the zombies that whole storyline was just kind of thrown in. So that was great. And also when I read this, I already felt it was relatable. I had no idea how actually relatable it was about to become. Okay, also in January, I then read another 5-star read, and that was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine, Evaristo. Everyone has been raving about this book because it's so good. It won the Booker Prize, joint with the Testaments, which, in my opinion, should not have been joined with this book. The Testaments was fine, but it was nowhere near on the level of this book. I'm rooting for it for the Women's Prize as well. So basically this is a series of interconnected stories of 12 characters who are mostly women, mostly black, and they are all in Britain. I think they're all set in Britain. So it's this really colourful painting of British life, spanning through so many generations. A lot of it is in the present day, but we go all the way back to like 1905, 1953, 1980. Like there's loads of little time periods that we drop in on, and all the characters are interconnected in such wonderfully complicated ways. I talked about this book actually quite recently in my book where I recommended queer literary fiction, so I don't want to repeat myself all over again. So I'll link to like the particular time code in that video so you can go over and watch there. But yeah, basically I absolutely loved this book. When I hold it, it's funny because it feels like so big and chunky, but I sped through it. I read it like, I think in a day or in a couple of days. Of all the books on this list, if I had to only recommend one of them, it would be this one, because everyone I've recommended it to so far has absolutely loved it as much as I have. Everyone I've spoken to about it has loved it. I just think it's a book for everyone. What else is cool is that this is a very literary and quite experimental novel in the way that it's written, and I know a lot of people I've spoken to were kind of wary that they might find that hard to read, they might find it a bit off-putting, and what's cool is that by the end they all said it didn't bother them at all, they loved it. So it's actually this really, really accessible book despite being a very literary experimental novel. So genuinely, this is a book I recommend to everyone. Okay, my next 5-star read is a really, really short one. This is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. I read this one for Thrillerathon. I'll link to that video where I read 9 thrillers in 9 days, and this was my favourite of all of them. I read it in like an hour. It's so short. It's definitely one I want to reread. It felt like an episode of Black Mirror is what I said in that vlog at the time, but it really did. So it's about a man taking a British citizenship test, but pretty soon into the novel you realise that this test is not what it seems, and it's actually this dystopia. And I just thought it was brilliant. It was so creepy. It was really emphasising the flaws in our citizenship test system and how we value someone's life in like such a short time by just a series of multiple choice questions. You like value their life and whether or not they deserve to live in the place they want to live, whether they deserve to live somewhere that they're safe, deserve to live somewhere where they have opportunities, where they're close to their loved ones. It's devastating, but it's a really, really good and fast-paced and dramatic book that, yeah, if you're for fans of Black Mirror, you should read it. For fans of social commentary, you should read it. I'm going to read it again, probably like tonight. Next, a book that I don't have physically here because it's not out yet, and I read an advanced digital copy, and that is How to Disappear by Gillian McAllister. So I absolutely love Gillian McAllister. You may have heard me raving about her before. I did a whole author spotlight video on her, which I will link to so you can watch. But that was before I'd read this book, and this book is by far my favourite book she's ever written. It was absolutely brilliant. It's really rare for me to give 5 stars to a thriller, which is funny because I love thrillers and they're my favourite genre, but for some reason I so rarely do give them 5 stars, and this one really earned those 5 stars because I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt absolutely terrified while I was reading it. It's basically about a teenage girl who becomes a witness in a trial, and I can't quite remember how much of this is spoilers, so how much I don't want to reveal, so I'll be vague, but there is, for some reason, she ends up having to go into witness protection, and then her family face this really, really difficult choice of, because you have to give up so much going into witness protection, and that was one of the things I loved about this book, is that I'd never considered that before. Like, I knew witness protection was a thing, but it had never occurred to me how devastating a choice it is to have to make, how much you have to lose, how much you have to walk away from, the contact that you have to completely sever with anyone who isn't coming with you. Like, it's this absolutely massive, devastating thing. So it's partly about this story of this family going into witness protection, but it also continues to be a thriller because the girl made enemies strong enough they still want to track her down. She also still hasn't given up on fighting for a cause that she is deeply invested in, and so things just get scarier and scarier. That's probably all I need to tell you about the plot because I'm already worried I'm giving too much away, but it's really brilliant, and this is Gillian McAllister at her absolute best, because what she's so good at is writing thrillers that are really tense and page-turning and gripping, but writing characters in those thrillers that feel so completely real to you and that you just empathise. Even when they're making terrible decisions, you empathise and relate to them so much. And she has done that since book one. I talked about that in my video about her. Like, her characters are just out of this world. They're people who stick with you because you feel like you genuinely got to know them. A lot of the time, like, even characters who are really well written in books, once I move on to the next book, you forget them, like they fade out of your mind. Whereas Gillian McAllister's characters really feel like genuine people I used to know. Okay, then I read The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. So this is a book that I just chose randomly from Waterstones. I'd never heard of it before, and I hadn't heard of this author, but then when I was looking at the book in Waterstones, I saw like what an amazing prolific writer she is, and she's won all these literary awards in Japan. This book is translated from Japanese, so now I'm really determined to read everything she's written. Since reading this, I've read one more, The Memory Police, which I actually didn't love, and I'm sure you've seen that, I talked about it in videos before. I didn't love it, but I still loved the writing. But this book, The Housekeeper and the Professor, is just so beautiful and so moving. So this is about a woman who gets a job as the housekeeper to this professor who is a maths genius but has a really short-term memory because of an accident. He can only remember about an hour and a half or about 80 minutes at a time before he loses everything. And so they form this relationship that is really meaningful, despite the fact that every day when she comes to work, he doesn't remember her. He has these little post-it notes that he like pins to his suit, and it's only because of those that he knows who she is and knows that he can let her in, that she's the housekeeper. But he has no memories of her, and he has no memories of her son who comes with her every day to the house. And despite that, these three characters form such a close and powerful and meaningful bond that this book just made me like redefine my entire notion of what relationships mean and what it means to have a bond with someone and where memory actually factors into that and where it doesn't. It's just beautiful. It's such a tearjerker, and her writing is amazing, and that's all I have to say on that one. I just love it. Okay, then I read The Heart's Invisible Furies, which I don't have with me here because I borrowed it from my parents and then I had to give their copy back, but I do want to buy it now. I will just say before going into it, I am disappointed in John Boyne, who is the author. He has recently been like tweeting stuff in support of J.K. Rowling, which is a real shame because I loved this book so much and I really want to be able to like gush about it amazingly without holding back at all. But now there's this part of me that's like, oh, that author has really disappointed me. But having said that, I will just talk about the book itself, The Heart's Invisible Furies, and this was absolutely a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. It's about a man called Cyril, and the book spans his whole life. So we meet him first when he is just, he's inside his mother's womb. She's just found out that she's pregnant, and then we check in every 7 years. We then meet him when he's 7, when he's 14, so on. You can do the adding from then on up until he's an old man. And it's about him growing up as a gay man in these various time periods that he lives through and different cities that he lives through. So a very different experience being gay in Ireland versus in Amsterdam versus in New York, and also in the different decades that he lives through. And it's just wonderful. I love books that span people's whole lives like that. But what's so great about this one is that from that premise I just told you, you would think it was a really sad novel, which it is. Like, terribly sad things happen. But what I wasn't expecting is that it's so funny, like laugh out loud funny. The characters are so often ridiculous. Like, even the worst, most awful characters are the funniest ones. So Cyril is adopted, and his adoptive parents are just comically terrible to him. And at one point he has a girlfriend who is just like so hateable but so fun to read about. And yeah, it's just, I laughed my whole way through it. I really nearly cried in this book. I almost never cry at books, but this one was close. I love dark humour. I love books that span whole lives. I love queer literary fiction. It just like hit so many bullet points for me. Bullet points? That is not what I wanted to say. Another one that I don't have physically here because I read a digital copy of it is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I am so excitedly waiting for my finished copy to arrive because it's beautiful and I can't wait to show it off and probably read it again. So Emily St. John Mandel is the author who wrote Station 11. Station 11, it was really, really popular at the time. It's having a bit of a resurgence because it is again about a pandemic. And I really liked Station 11, but I loved The Glass Hotel. And it's really hard to describe what this book is about. I'm going to try, but if this doesn't make any sense, then maybe just try reading the book because it's a really indescribable book. So it's about these, genuinely don't even know how to start. We have this glass hotel. So we start with this glass hotel where these two siblings work, these two kind of estranged siblings, the girl Vincent and her brother Paul. And on this one night, they see this writing scrawled on the wall, one of the glass walls of the hotel, this threat, and this kind of sets in motion all sorts of things that happen in the book. But we're jumping back and forward all the time between different time periods and meeting up with these characters at different stages of their lives. So one of the strands of the storyline is that Vincent, the sister, at the hotel, she's working as a bartender and she meets this really, really rich businessman who stays at the hotel and ends up leaving her job to go and be his trophy girlfriend. But he is actually involved in this massive, well, can I say what he's involved in? We know that he ends up in prison, basically, so we're going to see how that happens. So that's just one of the strands of the storyline. The brother, we know, is like kind of running away from this trauma of this terrible night at university that he experienced, so he has a lot of problems with drugs, and he's just a deeply troubled, sad character. So that's one of the strands. I'm doing such a bad job, but I told you this is impossible. It's basically just a book that jumps around in time. It jumps between different what-ifs and what could-have-beens. These parallel universes that basically just exist in people's head, but almost exist in real life as well, and you kind of could interpret that they do. You could interpret that ghosts exist in this book, but you could interpret that they don't. It's kind of just a book that you read and you decide. You decide what it's about. That's what I'm going to say is my lazy booktuber, because I can't figure out how to describe this book. It's just that you have to decide what it's about. I will say it's a book that I could not stop talking about. So I was reading this book and I went on a run with Adichie, and literally I hate running and I get so out of breath, but I still managed to find the breath in my lungs to keep talking about it the whole way around our run because there were just so many little strands that I wanted to pick apart. So it's just a bizarre, haunting, mesmerising novel that is very, very different from Station 11 in that it's not a dystopia, it's based in our real world, but with these, slightly possibly supernatural elements involved. And I'm going to have to read it again. That's what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to read it again before the end of the year because I'm sure it will be in my end of the year wrap up of favourite books, and I will have prepared by that point a much better pitch about it. And finally, my most recent 5-star read was Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which I'm thrilled at because I bought this book so long ago and it was a 5-star prediction when I bought it. I bought it when I first got to Oxford, which was in 2016. I went into a bookshop because I was feeling nervous and I was a bit early for meeting my tutor for the first time, so I went into a bookshop and I saw this book and I was like, I've been meaning to buy you for ages. I always thought I'd love you, so I bought it and then I just put it on my shelf and I left it there for 4 years because I was so convinced I was going to love it so much that I became really nervous to read it in case it didn't live up to the hype I'd created. But luckily it did, and more so. So this is my first Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie book, other than I read We Should All Be Feminists, which is her TED Talk transcript, but this is my first of her novels. I'm definitely going to read more because I absolutely love her writing. And it is a story about these two teenagers from Nigeria, but our main character we follow is the girl, Ifemelu, and she and her boyfriend, Obinze, so they grow up and fall in love as teenagers in Nigeria. They go to university, but because of the strikes, they end up having to leave the country. And so he ends up in the UK and she ends up in the States. And we mostly follow her, but we do flash to his perspective for some parts of the book. And it's about their love story, spanning all these years and all this distance. But it's also about Ifemelu's observations of moving to the States and kind of discovering race in a way. So she starts writing this blog about observations about race because of the fact that she had never seen herself as black when she was growing up in Nigeria, and suddenly she moves to the States and discovers that she is seen as black, And what was really, really interesting is that her blog is about her observations of race in the US, but also something that I'd never considered before, her observations of the difference between American black people and non-American black people. So she's non-American, and actually how they are perceived differently and perceive race differently. So there was just like a lot of nuance that I'd never thought about, and it was really fun to read her blog entries and also just to read about her story and the world that she comes across. And also just the contrast when she first moves to the States, which she has always been told is this amazing land where dreams are possible, and she's expecting it to be so amazing, and getting there and seeing how much poorer her life is there than the rich, if not not rich in terms of wealth, but rich in terms of community and this life that she had in Nigeria, suddenly moving to the States and finding that she's so much poorer there, and yet people still kind of look down on her. People don't expect her to speak English properly, even though English is her first language. That's the language that she speaks. And people don't expect her to be that well educated, even though the education system where she came from, she was so much more advanced than they are in the States. So it's really kind of highlighting the bias and the very ignorant bias that we have. I know I'm not American, but I think we have the exact same thing in the UK of looking over at countries in Africa and grouping them all together and kind of thinking that they must have come here to to the UK or America for a better life, and thinking that we can offer a better life without actually questioning whether or not we really can, whether we're that much better. So anyway, it was really interesting in terms of these questions that it threw up about race, but also it is at its heart a love story, and I loved that. And it is this just a story of a young person. She has various different relationships and her trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life and her job, and I found it again just really, really accessible and relatable, even though it was covering these deep issues which I thought would make it harder to read. It wasn't hard to read at all. It was beautiful. I said I was like vlogging. Which video was this that I was vlogging for? I think I talked about it in the Sims Control What I Read video, so I'll link to that in case it was that one. But I said in there that this was a book I wanted to be reading forever. I didn't want to finish reading it because I was so enjoying the experience, and that's so true and very unusual for me because I do read fast and I love reading fast, but somehow in this one I deliberately wanted to slow down because this was a book I wanted to savour every word, and I think because it's spanning such a long period of time, I wanted to spend that time. I wanted to be going on that journey with Obinze and Ifemelu for all of those years with them, so it's almost like a shame that I finished it in a week and a half. I wanted to spend all of those years with them. It's just a beautiful book. Maybe this would also be the one I would recommend to everyone. Okay, so those are 8 5-star reads so far in 2020. I would love to know what other 5-star reads you have read so far this year, so leave me a comment and tell me what I should be reading next, and I shall see you next time. Have a great week, everybody.